What's the catchy phrase today? Dads and grads, right? A ton of phone calls into the office in regards to, hey, what do I get as a gift for dad? What do I get as a gift for someone that's graduating high school, college, master's, maybe even doctorates, right? And that's what we're going to discuss today. Here joining me is Adrian, a face you're pretty familiar with, and brought a bunch of things to show as an example. And I want to start the conversation off by some general topics in regards to this thing, and that is, obviously, we will go through the most popular, most requested, most bought, right? But at the same token, I want to go into alternatives in regards to the most bought. I want to discuss things like, hey, how often does one even consider or think about that this is a gift that's most likely not going to be resold, it's going to last forever, on top of that, passed on to a different generation. And last but not least, the big thing in between choosing a pre-owned watch versus a brand new watch for a gift, that always people tend to be a stickler saying, well, this is a gift, it must be brand new, when in reality it really doesn't. I guess we should start off with, you were a fairly recent grad, certainly a lot more recent than I am.
Not that recent anymore.
Yeah, well, not that recent anymore. When you were graduating high school, was there a glimpse or something that you would hope for as a gift graduating high school in regards to a watch, or were you more of a car guy?
I was more of just don't get in trouble and do the right thing guy. But nevertheless, I did get a Breitling Chronomat Evolution when I graduated high school. And at the time, in 2009, it was Breitling was it, right? Not that it's not it anymore, but back in the day, that was the watch to have. So when I got that blue dial, that was it. That was pretty much my introduction into watches. And then I started selling watches not too long after that. So I got to say, it's probably one of the gifts that is the most memorable for me, and I think that seems to be the path for anybody who receives their first, luxury watch.
How much wear time does your Breitling get today?
Oh, I forget what I did with that watch. I think I gifted it to somebody, which is also not really something that we that people do anymore, but doesn't get anywhere because it's no longer in my possession.
See, and that's going to bring up a point we're going to discuss later. Now, when I was graduating high school back in 1962, my family was not in the position to give me a big watch. My family was not in the position to really give me anything, right? And one of the things that I ended up with is years later, post the military really, was a Rolex that I bought myself for about $1,500 at a pawn shop in Atlantic City. It was an old Datejust that beat the crap, et cetera, which I also don't have anymore. Didn't really have a big meaning to me because for me it was just a flex at the time. But let's talk about, I have a grad at home who graduated a year ago. Actually, it's going to be 2 years. And what I ended up getting Marcus was a Royal Oak in stainless steel. At the time, the watch was trading for some ridiculous amount of money. I think it was up there in the 70s and 80s. It was a blue dial Royal Oak. Of course, through my connections, through a friend, I ended up getting this watch at list. So I didn't pay $80,000 for my son's gift. I paid a lot less. And the idea behind it was, for me anyway, is here's a kid who's been on his own since he was 15 years old, made money and has been financially independent since he was 15 years old. At the age of 16, he bought himself a Rolex. So he's already had a fancy watch. And I said, how do I make something that's memorable? And I based the criteria based on the kind of person he is. Marcus is actually a lot more humble than I am. Marcus is a lot more practical than I am. And I knew that it was going to take a whole lot of time until Marcus would put himself in a watch of that stature, sort of that next level watch, right? And I said to myself, at the time I bought him the watch, is this a watch he can afford himself? And the answer was yes. Is this a watch that he spend money on, or that kind of money on? The answer was no. And I said, you know what? Considering the fact that the kid graduated with a 4.23 GPA, got into every single school he applied to, and he did well on the personal level, on the business level, educational level, just all around great kid, I felt that it was well deserved. Now, after I gifted him this watch, he was actually taken back due to his conservative nature, but obviously he did love the gift. And I know that that's a watch that's never going to be sold because of how much meaning is behind it and what was said when I gave him the watch, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my gift to my son. And I know you gifted your wife something.
Well, me and Jess started dating after she graduated college, so there was no graduation type gift. But She was never really one for watches or jewelry. She likes her bags, she likes her clothes, she likes this. But she did one for, I did get her, the most recent purchase was probably a push present. She wanted a Tiffany OP from Rolex, which I got her, and she never takes that watch.
But I think your decision was strictly based on the fashion end of things, right? That was like the hip accessory to have. I don't think Jess is really into like, oh my God, this is a super rare Rolex. It's discontinued.
She's like, I like this dial, it's a Rolex, I have this. And that's exactly what she went for, and she never took it off.
So let's back up a second. So our team wrote a pretty nice, simple article called Best Luxury Graduation Gift Watches, right? It's on the Gray Market magazine. If you guys haven't checked that out, definitely do. Lots of good information, lots of good articles on there. And it simply runs through what I would call the go-tos, right? Get into something that's under $4,000, people will reach usually for a Tag Heuer, because it's within that price range that's affordable, that still makes a statement. Tag Heuer is still a humongous name. They're sponsors of Red Bull F1 Racing. You know, you see Tag Heuer plastic everywhere. And the reason they're so big and the reason they're so popular is because you're just getting past sort of that fashion brands, sort of that a little bit of an upper echelon brands like a Tissot, right? And now you're getting into like a real, what people will consider like a real high-end Swiss watch. And that's where Tag Heuer comes in with a slew of models. Carrera is probably a good one to mention. It's gonna set you back $2,000 to $3,000, and it certainly is a good gift to go with. Then you jump up to, let's see, the article jumps into, you know, something that's, you know, around that $5,000 to $6,000 range. And that's when you get into things like Cartier Santos. That's when you get into things like Tudor, right? So
IWC.
I think the Black Bay is the one watch to mention that is probably most asked for. It comes with a slew of bezels. It's got the blue, it's got the black, it's got the red, and it has the look, and it has now what we'd like to say recognizability, right? As the flex factor to it. The Cartier Santos, such as this one or even this black one on a rubber strap, these are the guys that somebody's going to see it on the wrist and they're going to recognize it. Now that works because you're giving this to a young individual, and flex culture is important, especially, you know, in young people. They want to get out there, whether they're heading off to college or they're heading off to the workforce, and they want to show that, hey, I have a watch, I have the watch on my wrist, right? Like a timepiece rather than just, you know, something quartz that tells time, if you will, because people pay attention to that, whether you're going into college or whether you're going into grad school or out into the workforce.
Well, one thing that we didn't mention, which I think was most important, was the Omega Speedies. Speedies are well under $8,000.
Exactly.
You get Speedies under $5,000.
Depending if they're new, if they're pre-owned. You know, if we're strictly talking new, you know, you're paying up for them. But an Omega Speedy, the number one seller in that price range when it comes to gifting, right? Whether it's Father's Day, whether it's graduation gift, because that is one of the most iconic, top 10 iconic watches out there for me, and people certainly reach for that. So that's a no-brainer, you know, with kind of being obvious here, right? And I'm going to get into some alternatives in a second. Then you jump up in price a little bit, you get into the Rolex OPs, you get into the Rolex Submariners, you get into the Explorers, you get into the Datejust 41 millimeters and things of that nature. Milgausses, and you start jumping into that $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 price range. You start looking at things like maybe Vacherons, right? You're not quite there for Patek and Audemars Piguet, but here's an overseas black dial, the latest and greatest version. One of the things that people tend to overlook, and both parents, or the gifters, I should say, they fall into the hype, and they fall into the hype of what they see where? Mostly social media. You type in hashtag watches into Instagram today, what are you going to get? Rolex, AP, Richard Mille, Patek, right? And then you're going to get into some of the alternative brands or other brands that have been out there. So my thing is, let me reiterate, and I've said this multiple times when people call me and they say, I'm looking for a particular watch, and I ask them, what's your purpose, or what's the driving factor, what's the motivation? I hope they answer me honestly and say that, A, flex is very important to me. And if that's the case, if that's the thinking behind it, think about, A, is my child or my husband want to show off this watch, or is he more of a low-key person, right? Because flex is really a big deciding factor. And if that's the deciding factor, don't even bother looking at alternatives.
Yeah, we're talking personality is key here, right? Because every single individual has a different personality. So although Rolex is the most recognizable, obviously choice number one for a gift for somebody else or for yourself, you kind of have to identify the individual. Does that individual play sports? Is he a utility guy? Does he dive? Does he, what does he do? Is he a pilot? Right? There's a lot of different factors, which actually leads people into making the wrong decision because they go for what's recognizable. They go for what their neighbor's wearing. They go for what their friends are wearing, without really digging deep into who they're purchasing the gift for.
And to flip that around, somebody that's graduated college, for example, is getting ready to go into the workforce. Think from the perspective of how that individual will be looked at when they walk into that office. Here's a fresh guy out there, starting salary $45,000 a year, and he walks in with a $10,000 watch or a $15,000 watch that's uber recognizable. That's another thing, is your child, for example, going to be comfortable wearing such an expensive watch going into the office, right? Where he may find himself walking in to an environment where his boss is wearing a Casio, and here he comes in wearing a $20,000 Vacheron, right? It's also, as bad as that sounds, I've lived that when I was in the corporate world, right? Because I got into watches while I was still working at the bank, and I would show up at work wearing gold Rolex, and people would actually look at me funny, like, who the fuck is this guy, right? Like, why does he get up coming in wearing these expensive watches?
Probably knows what he's doing.
Exactly. Or I remember one time I pulled up to a Christmas party, and my boss at the time is in a driveway with my team members. He just bought himself a brand spanking new Ford Escape. And I hear him going over the features of this brand new vehicle that he purchased. And I pulled up in a brand new BMW X5. That was not a good look. Yeah. Let's just say my bonus suffered at the end of that year. You know what I mean? It's as terrible as it sounds, but that's, again, maybe the corporate culture's changed since I've been in it, but and we don't really have corporate politics here, but I don't know. I don't think that went off too well. But let's talk about new versus used, right? Big myth in regards to, well, if I'm gifting something, it's got to be brand new. False. Plenty of clients have bought pre-owned pieces from us, and we're uber happy with them because when they got them, I was like, oh my God, well, this watch looks new. Well, again, I can only speak for myself and a handful of other dealers that I do business with that are in the same space. Like Watchbox, for example. If you buy a watch from Watchbox or us and it's a pre-owned watch, it comes in, it looks brand spanking new because we will not take a watch out there with scratches, with blemishes, or anything of that nature. When a pre-owned watch comes in, what do?
Unless it's vintage,
Unless it's, I was going to say that.
Yeah, of the watch.
Yeah, if it's a vintage piece, if it's something that has a retro look, even neo-vintage pieces, things of that nature, that's not something we're going to mess with. We're going to keep that look. But then again, even with some of the neo-vintage stuff, like some of the older two-tone subs, like this guy, for example, right? We're still gonna. Well, no, that's the new one. We're still. You'll notice there's green plastic on here, right? That's because this watch was polished. That's because this watch was serviced internally. So once I take all this plastic off, the watch will still look brand new. With the real vintage stuff, that's stuff that you don't want to mess with. In fact, like you said, it takes away from integrity. So the myth of buying new and versus pre-owned for a gift, and again, I'm not saying that if you're a stickler of something being brand spanking new with tags and stickers as it came from the store, fine. But if you're working with a budget, oftentimes by going the pre-owned route, what happens? You are able to get more watch for your dollar, right? And especially in today's crazy world of Rolex, right? You get into some of these Rolexes. For example, what's a brand new Daytona like this going to run today?
So a black dial is going to run you just north of $30,000.
Where this is a pre-owned, obviously this thing has been polished and taken care of and it looks new. What does this run?
So again, it's gonna be a difference of about 10%. Right. So on a purchase of that magnitude, that 10% is in
exactly. So if you want to stick to that $25,000 price range, right? You can still get that Daytona. It's still not out of reach. But you just go the pre-owned route. Now, money is the biggest advantage, and the second biggest advantage, as I said earlier, is more bang for your dollar because you get into that $25,000 price range. Believe it or not, you can get a Patek Philippe, right? You can get, let's say something like this, a 50-35 annual calendar, right? Which is in those mid-20s range. And there's a slew of other annual calendars from Patek or some Calatravas that you can get into on a secondary. They're no longer made. It's still a Patek Philippe. It makes a statement. You know, it's just a question of, again, going back to what you said, the individual, right? Who is this individual? And then in a case where a Patek Philippe maybe a little much, but you still want to get somebody a gold watch, there's a slew of options. Like I brought this Roger Dubuis, right? It's a full perpetual calendar, talking about getting bang for your dollar, right? It's a limited edition. I think they made 88 of these or 28. no, 28 of these, right? It's a retrograde perpetual calendar, something that most people won't even recognize what it is. But at the same token, if the person you're buying this for, he's a real horological nut, if you will, he'll get it. He'll understand.
And we're talking generally speaking, and we've had during Father's Day or before Father's Day, we've had individuals that are into watches and horology nuts, and will buy something like that for their father because they understand what it is. They understand the product, right? So that's primarily what we're talking about here. I'll never forget the one time years ago when I first started in this business, you sold a Grand Complication Patek Philippe to a gentleman that was buying it for his father. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
So, it's very rare that you get something like that. For the most part, for Father's Day, you're going to get something that's
pair of socks and a tie,
or whatever the case may be. But yeah, there's so many different options out here. I mean, especially if you're buying a gift. Birth year watches are a big thing, right? If there's some
the worst thing ever.
It can be one of the worst things ever, but it's also very fun. If you get a, let's say, Daytona from 1980s or 1990s, and you're able to provide that with all of its original components for a birth year, for some type of commemoration for a father or a son, I think that's one of my favorite things.
One of the things the reason I just mentioned that it's the worst. It's the worst ever for us as dealers when people call in and say, I need a birth year watch.
It's a difficult mission for sure.
It's a difficult mission for many reasons. For the most part, 9 out of 10 times, it's usually a Rolex, right?
Oh, for sure.
And when you're talking about Rolexes, okay, well, what's the year? Is it the serial number?
Is it what's on the papers?
Is it what's on the papers?
Yeah.
Now, are you okay getting a watch with no papers? Are you okay getting a watch? Do you want a watch that's a full set? And everybody usually wants the full set. Mm-hmm. And 9 out of 10 times in that date range, remember, that's not the times where Rolex just flew out the window and there was a waiting list. That's the time when you walked into the store, there was 100 to choose from, right?
Yep.
And they were discounted even. So you're looking at a Rolex Submariner, let's say, from the 80s, and, well, according to the serial number, it's this. But according to the papers, it's this because it was sold a year later or 2 years later, sometimes 3 years later. So it becomes like, oh, well, what do you want? And then you say, well, I want both to match. Now I'm out there looking for a vintage watch with papers that match the serial number, and at the same token, because it's now most likely vintage, I have to try to find a prime example, which makes it a nightmare for guys like us because it's almost impossible to do so. You end up chasing your tail. You find the watch, but then the watch is not in the condition, and you end up paying for the birth year, and the watch is not worth the money. Big nightmare. I want to switch gears to some of the other alternatives that are out there, right? So let's see, what did I bring?
I'm going to pick my favorite.
Please.
My favorite alternative.
Please.
And that would be because there's a range of pricing, but I would say sub 20,000, above 5,000. Bulgari Octo Finissimo.
Yeah, well,
That's my favorite.
I brought two of them. Well, here's the cheaper version.
Here's probably my favorite watch under 20,000, pretty much almost on the market. That's the Finissimo skeleton in ceramic.
I love that watch, and I like the Finissimo. I like the Finissimo line, the newer. So here's the older Finissimo line, a little bit on the bulkier side, heavier bracelet, heavier case, right? Bigger size, right? And then as of late they did the Finissimo, which is the thinner. The ultra thin. And this thing comes in many versions. It comes in an automatic, comes in a chronograph. And I will agree that the skeleton is indeed my favorite. It's an uber light watch made out of titanium. It's extremely comfortable. Oddly enough, as thin as it is, it wears big on a wrist. And I think, would you agree to say that the Bulgari Octo Finissimo line is slowly crawled its way into the likes of gifts like the Rolex, like the Tudors, like the Omegas?
I think they're doing a much better job right now versus before in regards to marketing. We follow social media so heavily, and we see the likes of Maluma, one of the biggest artists in the world. He's wearing a Octo Finissimo in a video that got billions of views, right? And you're seeing this coming to the forefront more often, and people are really getting an understanding that, hey, this is not necessarily a jewelry company. They do some kick-ass stuff horologically. And people are getting that. They love the thin case, the thin profiles of it, how unique it is, skeletonized. And it's just a great value. You can still pick them up under retail, but I would say that's shrinking. That retail versus discount,
it is shrinking.
Threshold,
it is indeed shrinking. I think that LVMH is only getting started with Bulgari. I think we're going to see a lot of cool new things from them. Experimentation with materials. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming down from Bulgari. So I would definitely pay attention to the brand. Because I think aesthetically, it's one of the most beautiful watches out there.
So cool. Absolutely.
What I actually brought is I swung over to the Swatch Group, right? And I asked myself, okay, Tudor, Rolex and things of that nature. What are those? What are the alternatives there? And I went with, first of all, a brand that's near and dear to my heart, a watchmaker, Jaeger-LeCoultre. Today, and again, this is a pre-owned master compressor dual time, and with the master compressor line, and not necessarily this watch, but pretty much anything from this line, you can pick these things up sub $10,000 depending on the variation of complication. And again, mind you, this is a watch that was pre-owned at one time, now it looks brand new because it's been polished, brand new strap, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this is a good alternative for a gift. This is more of a rugged watch. A watch tested over 1,000 hours. Their Master Control series is when they test each watch over 1,000 hours, which is a very vigorous test for a watch if you think about it. 1,000 hours, do the math. It's a lot of time. Within Jaeger, some of their newer stuff that they've been doing is so classic, it's so timeless, and this is what I wanted to mention. There's another thing that you need to discuss when you're talking about gifting something to someone. Percentage-wise, I would say 90% of the time or 80% of the time, a watch that's gifted for graduation or to dad, it's not getting resold. So you got to think long term. You got to think long term. Hey, this is a watch somebody's going to have pretty much forever. How do you come to figure out, is this watch classic enough to stand the test of time? And I tend to go backwards. Obviously, with Rolex and Omega, it's an obvious answer. They've been around for a long, long time. Well, the Master Compressor series from Jaeger has been around for probably 20 years. But when you get into the classic lines from Jaeger, with pieces such as this one or this perpetual calendar from Jaeger, you can say, well, this has lasted a ton longer and it's going to be around a ton longer. Or to switch over to IWC, one of my favorite brands, the Portuguese. This is one of the most timeless designs. It's 100 years old. So it kind of gives you a good testament to, this is going to stick around. Unlike this Roger Dubuis, for example. This is the old Roger Dubuis, before they were bought over by the Richemont, right? I don't think we'll ever see these ever again because now they're bigger, more modern, very, very sporty with their car lines and things of that nature. So
the one brand that completely did a 180 in terms of what they used to do.
180 is not even a question.
It's hard to even identify them as the same brand. But I think one of the most important things to point out anytime it comes to purchasing a gift, whether it's a watch or anything else for somebody else, is the use factor. Because one of the things you always run into is, will this person get use out of this watch? Am I buying a gift just to say, hey, it's a watch, I got something expensive?
I got you an expensive gift,
Or will they use it? And that is the absolute key here in making a decision when you're buying a watch for somebody.
That happens fairly often, right? And what ends up happening is, here's a person that received that gift, the watch is sitting on the shelf, it's not getting any wear time, but then they feel bad trading it in or trading it up for something because it's a sentimental thing, right? But they won't be caught dead wearing something like that. So
I had just a quick story. So we had a customer that I've been working with for many, many, many years, and he purchased to the tune of millions of dollars, let's say, for himself. And he wanted to get his dad something for, it was either Father's Day or birthday, so he bought him a Patek Gondola at the time. And 5200G, blue, I remember. And as in conversation, I'm always asking him about his father's watch. How does he like it? He goes, man, he never wears it. He goes, I got him this watch, but he never wears it. Watches just aren't his thing. Now, on the flip side, I had a gentleman buy something for his wife who was never into watches, and now she buys watches on the regular, right? So one of two things can happen. It's very interesting and unique to see that, how
So let's bullet point this. First and foremost, start with is the person you're buying a watch for a watch person?
Yep. The most important.
The most important, right? It's the most basic.
Read the room.
Read the room. Then you get into the fact of what type of person is this individual? Is he a conservative person? Is he somebody that's going to want to flex? Is he somebody that's going to enjoy it and just like be crazy over it? Or is he someone that's somewhat conservative, going into an environment where he needs to be conservative, and odds are this thing is not going to get a whole lot of wear time, right? Sometimes people are just afraid to wear expensive things, right? Crime, this, that, and the other, geographically, right? And you don't want to wear a big gold watch walking around London nowadays, It's articles all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. And certain cities in the United States as well. It's borderline dangerous, right? So is he a watch person? What type of person is he? If he is a watch person, you figure out the type of person he is, figure out the style. Is this somebody that wears a suit and a tie every day? Is this somebody that wears sneakers and track pants or whatever it might be, right? What is the overall style of that person? Because look, I know guys that won't be caught dead wearing this pattern, right? Size of a person is very important.
Very.
You know, when you get into some of these watches, like this little Cartier Santos, for example, like it'll fit mine and your wrist, but there's guys out there when they put it on, it's going to look like a ring.
It's probably not for Shaq.
Or it's probably not for Shaq. So you have alternatives. Another one I forgot to mention, Panerai.
Yeah.
One of my favorite brands. You know, when I started in this business, this was such a great seller. Today, not so much, which equals deals. So many alternatives to this. Very big, bulky, sporty watch. But if you're a guy that's going to wear a suit and a tie, let's say a new attorney that's going into the workforce, there's no way you can pull this off under, you know, your dress shirt.
Yeah.
It's another problem,
Yep.
right? And for the most part, keep in mind, everybody that's watching here, and let's say you out there buying a gift, 9 out of 10 times, you're still going to reach for a Rolex, you're still going to reach for an Omega. But look at other alternatives that are out there, especially if your budget doesn't allow, because the more popular something is, the more money it's going to be. So as an alternative, you look at other brands, other major brands, such as, again, IWC, Jaeger, Panerai, even Patek, even Breguet. Look at this Marine automatic, right, from Breguet. It's a sporty watch that's still affordable around a price range where you're not spending an arm or a leg, around prices of a Rolex, really, if you think about it. Look at up-and-coming guys. Bulgari is another one, right? And then if you want to flex for little cash, you can still go with an old school president, right? There's so many alternatives out there. But the number one and most key point is, as you said, and that is read the room, right? Reading the room is most important, knowing who you're gifting this watch. Because the worst thing that can ever happen is for any one of these, whether it's from the most popular to the less popular, is to sit on the shelf. And last but not least, especially when it comes to dad's gifts, I always tell the client the same thing. How long have you been married? I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years? I'm like, perhaps this is not the best surprise gift. Perhaps this is something that's actually worth discussing ahead of time. And as much as you kill the surprise factor, oftentimes it's actually smarter to speak to your significant other in advance and say, listen, this is what I was thinking. I got you.
Couldn't agree with you more.
I got you a gift. Here are your 3, 4, 5 choices.
Or what are your thoughts about this?
Exactly.
Because a lot of the times what can happen is you think you know. And then once you open up that conversation, you may be very surprised as to what maybe they were looking for something. Maybe they've been doing their own research. Maybe they really don't
go into their browser history. If your husband is a watch guy, go into their browser history, and you can actually skip the porn sites, and you can actually go into the browsing history and say, hey, he was browsing this website. Okay, what was he looking at? What were the pages that he visited? You can easily, like, if you go to our website or any other website, what's the most basic format? By brand, right? Yeah. So if somebody goes into a browser and they go into a watch website, you can actually follow their history and see at what brands did he actually look at. You can actually narrow it down. You know, if your significant other didn't look at a single IWC or a single Tudor, and he spent most of his time on Rolex, but guess what? You just nailed it. Go see which Rolexes he actually looked at.
That's actually one of what the most successful software companies in the world do, right? They guess as to what your next move is going to be. So you can actually tell a lot about somebody in their browser history, and you keep bringing me back to this browser history. But are they F1 fans? What team do they like? Oh, they like this team? Maybe a tag is great for them. Oh, they like this team? Maybe an IWC is good for them. What kind of actors do they like? What kind of athletes do they follow? And then you can literally chop it down to get down to the nuts and bolts of what they are actually wanting versus what you thought they wanted.
Think about what the big boys do when you go out on your Instagram and you say something. You say something out loud in the room, and next thing there's an ad that pops up on your feed, or
there you go.
And your browsing history or the algorithm works in a way. What's interesting? Like if I go into my Instagram right now and I start scrolling through the suggestion list, I'm going to see a bunch of racing stuff. I'm going to see a bunch of watch stuff, right? Because that's what I'm into. That's the accounts that I follow, right? It's as easy as going into a significant other's account and see who he follows, right? And hopefully there's no surprises there.
Boy, as you're saying this, I'm thinking this could really open up a can of worms or something.
Yeah,
so,
some dads.
Gentlemen, I apologize in advance if your wives go through your browser history and they see something that they weren't supposed to see.
But listen, this is how social media works today, and it's designed to figure out what is it that you're into and put that content in front of you, and you can piggyback off of that to figure out that perfect gift. Just keep in mind, again, one thing I didn't say. We said start with the individual, right?
Well, price.
Is it
price?
We
kind of covered price, but
don't get carried away in price, because what usually happens is I set a budget of $1. hypothetically. And I'm like, well, if for $1.10 I can get this, with just $1.20 I can get this. Don't fall into that trap either. If you have a budget set in mind, there's so many options within a healthy budget, whether it's under 5, under 10, under 15, under 25. There's so many healthy options out there. You can always take your time, and you can always come up with alternatives, narrow down whether you're doing based on browsing history, whether you're doing it based on speaking to your significant other, or your child for that matter, who's a graduate. Don't fall into the fact that you think you know what your kid is going to like, because that age gap, trust me when I tell you, the only reason I was able to pick something for my son is because this is what I do for a living.
Right. I think it's important that if you're looking for that gift, whether it's for dad or for your son or daughter, I think it's important to narrow down a few different options, then come to a company like ourselves or somebody else who has expertise, who is professional in these matters, and say, hey, I picked X amount of pieces. Let's call it 5 watches. What do you think? Oh, and then one of our sales associates would get on the phone and could easily dissect down to the watch exactly what we think would be the best choice for that individual.
Which is why oftentimes when a call comes in on a grad gift, somebody's graduating high school or college, we'll pass that inquiry off to some of the kids that just graduated college, right? But again, take everything with a grain of salt, because again, every single individual, whether it's a salesperson here or any other company, is still going to be biased.
Let me ask you a question. What is the number one mistake that people make during this process?
They buy what they like.
No.
What?
Doing it last minute.
Oh, yes.
That is extremely, extremely important, because when you do things last minute, and not only watches, in life, you end
settle.
up making a mistake.
You settle.
end up either overpaying, you rush it, you need to get it shipped. FedEx lost a package, whatever the case may be, right? So give yourself enough time to not make this a stressful situation. Time.
Adrian,
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to pick a watch under $10,000 other than the main alternatives from this pile.
Under $10,000, I think that Tudor Panda, I think, is one of the best things. I think, first off, I think the engineering behind this watch is actually excellent. And for under $10,000, it looks like, I don't even like to say it looks like a Panda Daytona. It looks like a Tudor Panda. It's got it has its own design DNA. It has its own personality. Comes from a great company. Tudor Panda would be one of my choices. I would also say I have to go IWC. I got to go with the big Pilot.
You're going with IWC Pilot. I'm going to give you. Well, since you picked.
Wait, how many? I'm sorry. How many was I supposed to pick? 3?
One.
Oh.
You picked 2. But since you did that, I'll pick 2 as well.
When you give me the paradox of choices,
I'm going with the Portuguese, specifically on a bracelet. It's one of very, this is a new thing for them, when they did the Portuguese on a bracelet versus the straps.
I'm sorry, I don't like this question, because I'm talking about for myself, or if I'm getting this. This is where the personality comes into play. Who am I buying this for? I don't know who I'm buying this for. You know?
That is true. So I guess on a personal level, I'm going to go back in time, and I'm going to go with a Panorama Marina. I don't think you can ever go wrong. This green one is just amazing, but just any Panorama Marina really will do. Guys, we'll leave you with this, right? There's really no wrong or right way to picking out a gift, but there are certainly some points that I hope we covered enough to help you in the journey. I will apologize again to the dads if something comes up funky in your browsing history, and really to the grads if you think about it. But when all else fails, just remember the who, remember the use, and remember to do it ahead of time and not last minute.
Do your due diligence, give yourself enough time to make the right choice.
And stick with your budget as well, I think is also important. Adrian, thanks for joining me, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you on the next one.
Happy Father's Day.